Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Andrew Stott and I'm the Emperor of Stomaria. Today I want to talk about the difference between Stomaria and the Empire of Stomaria, why the Empire was founded, and what the conditions are for membership. So the difference between Stomaria and the Empire of Stomaria, or simply the Empire or the Stomarian Empire, is that Stomaria itself is a nation in its own right, whereas the Empire of Stomaria includes not just Stomaria, but also the member states that make up the empire. So the easiest way to think about it is, historically speaking, you had Britain and the British Empire, you had Austria and the Austrian Empire, you had Persia and the Persian Empire, and so on and so forth. You have these core entities, and then you have the greater community that they have established, that they have built in some form or another. And so that is the immediate distinction between Stomaria and the Empire of Stomaria. Now, over time, since our foundation, in fact, the term Stomaria and the Empire of Stomaria has been used interchangeably, not least by me, and I think this has perhaps caused some unnecessary confusion. And I think the issue stems from the fact that when we were first established, we were established as the Empire of Stomaria, because even though we just existed as Stomaria at that time, we knew where we were going to go with this. We knew how we were going to develop, we knew how we were going to evolve, we knew the structure that we were going to adopt. And so the Empire of Stomaria and Stomaria was simply used interchangeably because there was no other member state. It was just Stomaria. I mean, for the longest time, it was just myself and the imperial family for the first year before we started allowing other individuals to become citizens, much less allow other nations and entities become member states. So that's where I think the confusion comes from. But going forward, I would like to try to distinguish as best as I can Stomaria from the Empire of Stomaria. So the Empire of Stomaria, just to reiterate, is the collective whole. It includes all of the member states of the Empire of Stomaria and not just Stomaria. Whereas when I'm talking about Stomaria, I am just talking about Stomaria itself and Stomarian citizens. So I just wanted to try to make that clear from the get-go. Now, as to why the Empire exists as it does, this has been discussed many times before, but just to reiterate, our goal, our intention was always to establish an entity which comprised of various nations, communities and peoples with various cultural identities and to some degree varying aspirations, but nevertheless shared some very common goals. That being the establishment of real-world communities, the attempt to attain greater levels of self-reliance and self-determination, to strive for sovereignty, even if we can't necessarily attain it, certainly not in our lifetimes, without some catastrophic event. But that all aside, it's just about establishing something real, establishing something genuine, establishing a civilization, a community that we can call our own. And that is the ultimate purpose of Stomaria's empire, to act as a way of bringing all of these different entities together and working towards a common goal. And we have been quite successful in doing that to some degree or another. But then there's the question of what is the condition of membership of this empire. Because even though that the Empire of Stomaria is obviously an association of free peoples, if you like, people voluntarily join the Empire of Stomaria and people can voluntarily leave the Empire of Stomaria. It's a very much an open door policy in that regard. But there are nevertheless certain terms and conditions attached to membership, which I would like to go through in this video, because a lot of people, I don't think, understand that even though we are obviously keen to expand the size and the influence and the appeal of Stomaria and the Stomarian Empire, we are nevertheless very selective with who we get involved, and we have to be, because if we're not, then it causes problems further down the line, as been the case more recently. Because if we don't have certain conditions in place, then even though we might artificially increase the size of Stomaria in terms of more member states, it doesn't actually mean anything if that entity isn't bringing anything new to the table, isn't bringing anything with it beyond the individual membership of a single individual who happens to have a flag. So that's something I want to go through now and just discuss in more detail the sort of the qualities and the qualifications that we look for, as well as the terms attached for those that do qualify for membership. So there are 7 areas, broadly speaking, that we look at when an entity, a community, a nation applies for membership of the Empire of Stomaria, that wants to become a member state, wants to become a part of the wider Stomarian community. And this revolves around longevity, it revolves around consistency, it revolves around maturity, it revolves, in a lot of cases, around territory, it revolves around ideology, it revolves around activity, and it revolves around community. And we consider all of these different aspects when a nation or a community, as I say, applies to become a member state of the Empire of Stomaria. And I just wanted to take a moment to go through each of these, if I can, just to explain a bit further what we are looking for in an applicant. So in terms of longevity, this one is pretty straightforward. We are looking for a history. And if that history does not exist, that is a mark against them, because we can't be sure, for instance, that the nation or the community or the entity that has applied will be around in 2 weeks' time, in a month's time, in 6 months' time, or whatever else. If we can see that they've been around for years or even decades, then we know they have staying power. We know they're going to endure the test of time. Or certainly it has a greater chance of enduring the test of time. So that is something that we look at first and foremost. How long have they been around? In terms of consistency, we're looking for things like, have they changed their name too frequently? Have they changed their flag too frequently? Have they changed their government structure, their driving ideology too frequently? Because if any of those have occurred, then we need to seriously consider what we're getting into, because this entity might join the Empire of Stomaria as a member state, and then they might change their flag, they might change their name, they might change their driving ideology, and all of a sudden the entity that has joined the Empire of Stomaria as a member state no longer resembles the entity that applied in the first place. So this is something that we have to be very conscious of. And when we look at longevity or the history, this is something that we will look into. We want to see if they are consistent in their approach, because again, this is very important to us. So when it comes to maturity, we're looking at 2 different areas. First, we're looking at the age of the founders, the leaders, and the citizens of that nation, of that community. Because if it is populated heavily by children, if it is governed by children, then it's a non-starter, because we cannot build a formal relation with a community that is run by children. It's as simple as that, for very obvious reasons. If I have to ask someone's parents' permission for them to do something, then that's something of a red flag. And I don't want to have formal interactions with preteens and adolescents. And I'm afraid it's just as simple as that. We're looking to do something real, something genuine, something generational. And this is not going to be advanced by trying to bring on board groups and entities that are comprised almost exclusively of children. So with that said, the other thing that we are looking for is the level of maturity that individual has. So for instance, if they are in the founders, the leaders, the citizens, if they're in their 20s, their 30s or older, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're mature. It frankly could mean the opposite. It means they have the potential to be very immature, the minds of children. And so how they approach things is important to us, and we need to see them in the way they approach things, because we're not looking for some nation which ticks all of the boxes, but is run by goofballs, frankly. You know, we're looking for people that are actually trying to aspire to accomplish something. And if they are going to undermine that through whatever antics they might get up to, then it's just not really for us. So that would be, again, a mark against them. When it comes to territory, this is only really applicable for protectorates and associated states, but the territory that nation, that community claims has to be private freehold land. There's no two ways about it. If they are claiming a public park, which they don't have ownership or control over, or a town or a city or the moon or a fictional planet or whatever else, it's completely pointless. It's irrelevant to us. We won't count it towards our own territorial empire. And so how they define their territory and what they are able to allocate to Stomaria itself is very important. And so this is obviously something that we take into consideration. Now, in terms of ideology, because of the size and the nature of the kind of entities that we are talking about, there are small enough groups of people that have a shared vision and a shared ideology. And what I'm talking about, broadly speaking, is if that particular entity, that group, that community, that nation are advocating things like communism or fascism or racism or any kind of ideology or belief system which discriminates or oppresses other people, then that's not something that we want to associate with. So that, again, is a pretty straightforward one. If it's an ideology which we disapprove of, which is contrast to our own values and objectives, then we just won't entertain the idea of getting them involved. When it comes to activity, we're looking at what they have been up to. So this sort of ties into the longevity side of things. You could be around for 5 or 10 years, but if you've done nothing in that 5 or 10 years, then have you been around for 5 or 10 years? It's that kind of conundrum, I suppose, because you could say that you were founded in, the early 2000s or whatever else, but if you've done literally nothing else except set up a Facebook group 6 months ago and have posted 3 times about the flag and the name that you've come up with, then that's really that's not of no relevance to us. I can't. There's no track record of any activity, of real world interactions or anything like that. So again, it would be a mark against them. If we can't see and we can't verify that they have been doing something in the real world, then what kind of community and what kind of nation are they? And when it comes to community, we are looking for actual established community with structures in place. So they need to be something workable. They need to be something that we can interact with. There's no good to us having a single individual which happens to have the name and the flag and the theoretical government structure in place, but they want to apply as a member state, but they don't bring anything else to the table. It's just them as an individual. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, in the sense that everyone's got to start somewhere. Stomaria itself only started off as myself and my wife, Empress Samantha. So, you've got to start somewhere. But at the end of the day, when entities want to apply for a member state position within the Empire of Stomaria, it is implied, I think, that what they are bringing to the table is an actual community. You are not a member state if you are simply representing yourself. You are just one individual that happens to have a flag, and that's just not good enough for us. And so we have upped the criteria since then, and a lot of the member states that have applied and been successful in the past, some of which may have already left, they would not qualify based on this premise alone, because, as I say, just having one individual become a member state is simply not good enough for us, because we could ask, for instance, 20, 30, 40, 50 Stomarian citizens, well, what we want you to do is we want you to set up your own nations, your own entities. It can just be you, come up with a name, come up with a flag, and then next week we'll announce 50 new member states of the Empire of Stomaria, because each of these people now represent their own entity. And that's just not good enough for us. It's just a pointless exercise, unless those people are bringing additional individuals to the wider community. Then they are just a single individual in their own right. And so, again, community is important. You are applying as a nation. You are applying as a community. You're not applying simply as an individual. So, again, that is another aspect of this application process that we consider. Now, even if a nation or a community qualifies for membership of the Empire of Stomaria, there is no guarantee that they will be able to join because they may not agree to all of the terms and conditions that we have in place. Now, these terms and conditions are not arbitrary. These are necessary as far as we're concerned enable for us to build a cohesive entity. So from the outside looking in, you would just assume that the Empire of Stomaria was one singular entity. Now, as the member states of Stomaria will already know, and as a lot of people that follow us will already know, the domestic affairs of each of these member states are almost exclusively down to the member state in question. So we don't interfere with the specifics of the government structure, we don't interfere with the specifics of their economy or what they're getting up to. I don't need regular updates as such, because I don't need to give them permission to do certain things. They are nations and communities in their own right. But that said, with that autonomy, that large amount of autonomy, does have to come some kind of restriction, in the sense that if everyone is just an autonomous entity in their own right, then there is no empire. So there has to be some commonalities that bind us together, and agreeing to these commonalities is what I want to go through now. So the nation must recognize the Emperor of Stomaria as the head of state of the Empire of Stomaria. Now, this is pretty much a given, as I'm sure a lot of people can appreciate, but the idea is that the Emperor of Stomaria, that being me, is the final arbiter of the overall direction of the empire. And I will get into more of this further down the list, but for instance, the structure and the foreign policy of the Empire of Stomaria is ultimately down to me. It is something that the Stomaria has established. We have, Stomaria established the Stomarian Empire, the Empire of Stomaria, and so we dictate the actual outlook of it and how it is governed and how it functions. And leading on from this, we have a common foreign policy, which means member states are not permitted to have formal relations with other entities, other groups, other communities, other nations, because doing so would undermine Stomaria and the empire as a whole. Because if each member state is having different relations with the same external entity, then everything just falls apart, and there's no unified voice. And as I say, from the outside looking in, we have to be viewed as one entity. The Empire of Stomaria has to be viewed as one entity. And so the foreign policy is dictated by the Emperor of Stomaria, by myself, and the other member states. That is just something that they have to give up when they become involved in Stomaria's empire as member states. They give up the right to have formal affiliations in their own right with other external entities. That is something that is discussed and decided by myself through the Imperial Court, which I'll probably get onto later. But the bottom line is foreign policy is dictated by the Emperor of Stomaria, not each individual member state. The nation must also accept Stomarian status, both gold and silver, as a medium of exchange within their own communities. They must contribute to the production of additional Stomarian status, and they must inform us on a periodic basis how many status are held in their respective treasuries. If applicable, the nation must also allow any private freehold land that they have in their name to be allocated and counted towards the territorial empire of the Empire of Stomaria. The citizens of that nation must be permitted to join other member states and indeed Stomaria itself. And this is a sort of common citizenship approach in which we allow the supporters of each of these entities to become involved in and support other member states if they so wish. This is not a requirement that they have to join other member states or Stomaria, but just allowing citizens to do so if they want is something that we have in place. The only condition to this is that in terms of playing an active role in one of the member states, once they have committed to becoming a governor of a particular territory, a minister, or playing some sort of formal role and taking on a formal position within a particular member state, they are not permitted to have a role in another member state. And that's just so there's no genuine conflict of interest, if you like. So if you are the governor of one member state, but you're also the governor of another member state, and there's an issue between those member states or the position that they're in, it creates a conflict of interest. And so we just want to make sure that when citizens, even though they can join as many member states as they want, they only commit themselves fully to one. Leading on from this a little bit further, the citizens of the nations that are looking to become a part of the Empire of Stomaria must be permitted to join the Imperial Guard, if applicable, if qualified, because the Imperial Guard is primarily a Stomarian institution, in the sense that it is something that Stomaria itself has established. It is a policing body, it is a security body, and effectively it is the closest thing that we have to a military. And this is going to be something that we have in common, in the sense that even though each member state can have their own policing force, their own security force, their own militia, however they want to describe it, ultimately the Imperial Guard is going to be established and set up as a way of bridging the gap between member states from a military perspective, if you like, in the sense that it is going to be comprised of the citizens of various member states within the Empire of Stomaria. So it's going to be held in common in that way. And as I say, it's primarily a security and policing institution, so they'll be acting primarily as stewards for public events. And finally, we want to make sure that the nation and the citizens of that nation speak English. We want a common language. Now, this can be a first language or it can be a second language, but there has to be the ability to communicate clearly and concisely with one another. So a common language is also a central theme within the Empire of Stomaria in order to ensure that things operate as smoothly as they can. Now, as you've probably been able to piece together through the points that I've just gone through, the Empire of Stomaria and the member states of the Empire of Stomaria have a lot in common, or intend to have a lot in common. So we do have a common head of state, we do have a common foreign policy, we do have a common money, we have common territory, we have common citizenship, we have a common military, and we have a common language. And these things are what bind us together. That's what makes the Empire of Stomaria an empire. And to go without any one of these things is only going to erode the integrity of the Empire of Stomaria. But that aside, everything else, as I mentioned earlier, is largely down to each member state. Their domestic policies are their own. They are very autonomous. They are largely autonomous territories and entities and communities within our own empire. And so there's a lot of leeway with that. There's a lot of flexibility in what they can and cannot do. Now, obviously, while we don't directly influence or dictate what they do with their respective nations and communities, we do observe what they do, because if they do engage in activities or practices which does not align with the Empire of Stomaria's overall values and objectives, if it brings Stomaria or Stomaria's empire into disrepute, if they start advocating for ideologies that we find abhorrent, then obviously action will have to be taken. But that aside, it is for each member state to decide their own path and their own destiny. And ultimately, because the Empire of Stomaria is built on voluntary association, it's just a case of if they want to join freely, they can. And if they want to leave because they're not happy with the way the Empire of Stomaria is structured or the way it is governed or the direction that it's taken, then they can leave. But equally, if we're not happy with the member states within the Empire of Stomaria engaging in certain practices or engage in activities that bring us into dispute, then we will not hesitate to obviously cut them loose and let them go, because again, we just need to make sure that the integrity of the Empire of Stomaria is firm, is held together. And I won't hesitate to ensure its survival by removing elements that I think are going to be disruptive or harmful to the community as a whole. So with all of that said, if you want to become a part of the Stomarian community, you can do so through our Patreon campaign, the link of which I shall leave in the description below as always. And if you wish to inquire as to whether or not the nation or community that you represent would be qualified to become a part of the Empire of Stomaria, or if you think that you would like to discuss this further, then please feel free to get in touch and let us know. But otherwise, if you did enjoy this video, please feel free to give it a like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll catch you in the next one.